Greetings, everyone. I'm Michael Liccardi at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, welcoming you to the second webinar in our Learning to Advocate for Children and Family series. We're excited to have you here today. As we begin, please share in the chat who you are and where you're from. We have over 1,000 people registered to join us today, so we love to know who you are, where you're from, what you do. And today's session will last for 1 hour and be followed by one more episode later this month. Today, our colleague, Maria Jose Gutierrez, will be simultaneously translating our webinar into Spanish. Thank you very much, Maria Jose. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls, then select Spanish. Oops, let me advance my slides, hang on. Then select Spanish, and to mute the English in the background, select Mute Original Audio. We also have closed captions available for those who would like to use them. To turn captioning on, click the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and select Show Subtitle, the size of which you can adjust. And if you are having trouble hearing the webinar today, just check your audio settings in Zoom, and if that doesn't work, you can also call in by selecting phone audio settings and following the instructions from there. And for chat and questions today, please use our chat feature. So any comments or questions for our host or for each other, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will respond. To receive a certificate of attendance, you have to complete our feedback survey, either when it opens at the end of our webinar or via the link that'll be in the email you'll receive with the recording of today's session. And the survey and the recording will be available in both English and Spanish, and will also be available on our YouTube channel. We also have created a digital badge that you can use on your social media to show that you are a supporter of advocacy. And we also created a reference guide. You can download the digital badge here via this QR code, or it's available on our website. And the same thing with the reference guide. It's full of all kinds of tips and pointers to help you, after these webinars, continue your advocacy and support your work. Now I'd like to introduce Kat McDonald, the president of Linchpin Strategies, where since its founding in 2004, she has led successful efforts to establish new medical research funds, protect small business opportunities from federal agency overreach and multi-million-dollar competitors, and secure increases of more than $4 billion for early childhood education. Kat's experience under Ted Kennedy on the Senate Labor Committee, staffing domestic social issues and appropriations for Congressman Steny Hoyer, and serving as the legislative director for Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. Kat, it is wonderful to have you with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Michael, thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, Maria Jose, for your interpretation today. And thank you all for joining us. If you were able to be with us 2 weeks ago for the first episode in this series, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us today, we're glad you're here. So we're going to be talking about how citizens can impact their government at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. And one of the things that I said on the webinar a couple of weeks ago is if you are one of the people who believes that citizens can't make a difference, or if you have friends who do, please join us for this conversation, because we're going to be talking a lot about examples of how people have made that happen. So we'll start today with a quote from anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because it is the only thing that ever has." As we kick things off today, we're going to start with a Mentimeter. We're going to do a word cloud to see how you would describe American politics today. We probably don't need to say this, but just in case, please keep your words in the word cloud G-rated. There is a link in the chat that you can click on and enter the words that you would use to talk about American politics. Or if you are one of our guests from overseas, please feel free to add. Oh dear. Yes, a hot mess, a lot of division. People are angry and self-centered, and it is really overwhelming. It feels corrupt, needs to be overhauled. Oh dear, dysfunctional and pathetic. I'm going to give it another moment as folks continue to add your thoughts. And it's really negative, isn't it? A mess, ridiculous, corrupt, character building. That is about as positive as we seem to be getting. Sad and fraught. There's a lot going on, and it is very discouraging. And Josephina says, America is supposed to be the role model, and instead we've joined the mess of the world. Well, you know what? You're not alone in feeling that way. Last fall, the Pew Research Center did a survey of voters, and 65% said that they often or always feel exhausted thinking about politics. More than half feel angry thinking about politics. And wow, almost 90% believe that the parties are more focused on fighting each other than on solving problems. And I think that that is the crux of it. People are frustrated because the very real needs of families and communities are not being addressed. And people tend to give up on a political system that feels like it just is not working for us. Josephina put in the chat, I'm worried about our children. And I think all of us who are parents and care about kids worry about the world that our children collectively are going to be growing up in. And that's why I feel such urgency that we need to get together and organize to help solve these problems. And at the end of the day, people getting engaged, talking and educating and pushing for the things that they need, advocating, can drive change. So in our last webinar, we talked about joining with other people in your community to lift up the issues that you care about. And we talked about finding messengers that match your audience and can help you and your issues appeal to the things that elected officials care about. And today we're going to talk about finding and connecting to even larger networks, including looking at some examples of where communities are joining together to affect important and meaningful systemic change. So how are they doing it? Well, one place to start is with these advocacy tools that are listed on this slide. And these are things that you can do sitting at your kitchen table, or you can do in groups with other people or encourage other folks at their kitchen table to do. So whether it is a Facebook page that talks about an issue, educates people, and gives them a place to say, I am interested in this, I care about this, I want to join forces. Change.org petitions are being used widely, something that we've used in actually my neighborhood where I live to great effect to solve problems. Email campaigns, group sign-on letters for individuals and organizations, letters to the editor, not just the big news outlets, but smaller local papers and online community news, presentations to local groups to help spread awareness and recruit additional volunteers, meetings with elected and appointed officials, and local political organizations. So what other tools can you use? Nicole put in the chat Instagram, another great way to communicate and also recruit folks. TikTok. You can tell that folks in the webinar are younger than I am. LinkedIn, absolutely. Great. Keep them coming. What other advocacy tools could you use? I'm going to give it a moment for folks to think. YouTube and posting videos, absolutely. Hill days. Thank you, Lori. Going to meet with elected officials. You know, on our last webinar, someone put in the chat that she was getting ready to do a stroller brigade with Head Start. In the chat, we've got town halls, absolutely, podcasts, protests, Twitter. These are all tools that are so important, and thank you. Keep them going, absolutely. So all of these tools are effective when it's an individual, but they're even more effective when you join together to create collective impact. So all of these tools came into play in a story that I would like to share with you from my own community. We had a bus line in Fairfax County, Virginia, that was primarily and heavily used by people who are elderly to get to doctor's appointments and to get to and from the grocery store, there was no grocery store actually in the community where people lived, and they had to take the bus line to get to the store. And it was mostly moms who were using that bus line to get to the grocery store to be able to feed their families. The Transit Authority announced that it was going to discontinue the bus line, leaving those constituents potentially with no options and no access to do the things that they needed to do on a daily basis. So in isolation, individual constituents absolutely could advocate about this issue. But they thought that if they came together, they would be able to have a greater voice and a better likelihood of being heard, and a better likelihood of solving the problem. So as I tell you this story of what they did, I'd like you to think about, how did people in the community with common concerns find each other? How did they amplify their issue? And how did they find an amplifier that could help them take on this challenge of persuading the local government to keep this bus line open? Well, it turned out a group of moms who were affected by this bus change went to their local elementary school for a PTA meeting. The PTA meeting had nothing to do with the bus service, but these moms, before the meeting started, were sitting together in a corner and talking about what a problem it would be for them if they couldn't get to the store. And another mom at the PTA meeting overheard them. And she suggested that she belongs to a social group, a social justice group. And that social justice group works with communities to try to elevate issues and address problems on behalf of people who might otherwise be disenfranchised and feel like they don't have a voice. The mom who was part of this social justice group offered to the moms who were reliant on the bus line to bring the issue to the group that she was a member of and see if this social justice organization might be willing to take on the issue. And they did. So the social justice organization, which had folks who were experienced and who knew how to do this, helped organize the community that was affected by the change to the bus line. And they used all of those tools that you just put in the chat and that we talked about on the prior slide. They educated the community and elected officials to explain why the bus line was so critical. And in the end, they were successful in maintaining the bus line. So, what are some of the takeaways from this story? First of all, being present and engaged in your community creates opportunities to network and connect and organize. These moms could have created their own organization, but instead, they discovered by being active in the community at a PTA meeting that had nothing to do with the bus line, they discovered an organization that already existed with resources and expertise that they didn't have. And working together with that group, they were able to amplify their voice and solve the problem. So I think a lot of us, when we're faced with a problem, it feels overwhelming and it feels like nobody else is working on this and we need to sit down and create an organization ourselves. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes we need to create a local chapter, but we could connect to a national organization that has supports for us in creating a local organization. Or maybe there's an organization that's already out there with people who are working on the issue or people who are working on something that's kind of connected, and you can tap into an existing network because creating your own is a lot of work. So let's talk for a minute about the social justice organization that these moms were able to connect to. This is an organization that's been present in Northern Virginia for about the last 20 years. It's called Voice, Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement. And it is a nonpartisan coalition of more than 50 mosques, synagogues, and churches joining with civic organizations in Northern Virginia to build power in middle and bottom communities. So Voice helped with this bus line issue, but it was a smaller project for them, actually one of many. And at the same time, Voice was working on a much larger project and working not just to try to put a Band-Aid on this project, but actually to drive really significant and impactful systemic change. When I say systemic change, what do I mean? Systemic change from in this sense is not just fixing problems, but going upstream to address the systems that create these problems in the first place. The goal is to change systems in our community so that they are responsive and adaptive to the needs of people. And it's not the people who need to adapt and work around the system. So, what was the big systemic change that Voice was working on? Well, Voice was looking at the challenges that were faced by people who had been incarcerated. And in Virginia, not unlike many other places, the people who were incarcerated and had served their time and were leaving prison were disproportionately from a minority community. Voice organized across the state to do more than 350 interviews with people who were incarcerated and people who were incarceration to ask what one change would make the biggest difference in their ability to reintegrate into the community upon release. And what they were told was that people who were incarcerated were charged with court costs, and those fees were due almost immediately as soon as they were released from prison. And of course, in prison, they didn't have the opportunity to earn money. And the really short timeline for paying these court costs was very difficult for them. Now, if you didn't pay the court cost, the penalty was that you lost your driver's license. And of course, if you don't have a driver's license, especially if you're living in places that don't have a good bus system or other public transportation, they had no way to get to jobs to earn the money to pay the court costs. So the advice from the people who were interviewed was, this is a significant challenge that needs to be addressed. Now, there could have been multiple ways to solve this problem. Voice could have done a big fundraiser and raised the money to give to people who were leaving prison so that they could pay their court costs. But instead, they decided to tackle the system that felt unjust and was counterproductive. So Voice started talking to people in the community, talking to elected officials, researching to get more information about how did this issue come about? Why were these court costs being charged? And in their research, what they discovered was even though these fees were described as court costs, when people paid them, they went to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And this was not a small problem. It was actually a really big problem. It affected more than 600,000 Virginians over a number of years. And each year, those court costs, those so-called court costs, generated about $9 million for the Department of Motor Vehicles. So Voice, as they were talking to elected officials and making the case that this was unfair and unjust and counterproductive, damaging people as they were released from prison, in a few cases, what they were told by elected officials is, we agree with you, but $9 million is a lot of money. And we need that funding for the Department of Motor Vehicles. So Voice expanded its campaign and started talking to people about other ways to come up with this $9 million. They did meetings, town halls, they met with elected officials, and finally, they worked their way all the way up to the governor. Voice scheduled a meeting with then Governor Northam and brought 1,500 people to the meeting with the governor. And they made the case to the governor that if he cared about racial justice, he needed to come up with another source of funding for that $9 million and stop charging recently incarcerated people fees that they could not pay when they had just gotten out of jail. And what do you think happened? The governor agreed. And when he proposed his budget, he did a budget amendment to use general tax revenues instead of these fees for recently incarcerated people to pay the budget for the Department of Motor Vehicles. Well, then that had to be passed by the state legislature. So Voice organized. They met with every member of the state legislature to make the case that the budget amendment should pass and another source of revenue should be found for the Department of Motor Vehicles. And this photograph on this slide is a picture of a number of Voice members who sat in the balcony at the time of the vote on the budget amendment to make sure that people, elected officials, knew that they were being held accountable. And at the end of the day, They eliminated the court fees, and they found another source of funding for that $9 million. So Voice had to work together to find and talk to decision makers all the way up to the top, to the governor. They needed to learn and understand and address the barriers, the financial barriers that kept this system in place. And as you can imagine, it took thousands of people working on this and a couple of years to make this change happen. So it required engaging a lot of organizations so that a lot of people could be brought to put their shoulder to the wheel. But the bottom line is, there are probably accelerator organizations that already exist in your community and that you can connect to help amplify your message. So now I have a question for you. How would you go about finding an accelerator organization that might already exist in your community? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that, and please put your suggestions in the chat. So in the bus example, moms who went to a PTA meeting didn't even know that they were looking for an accelerator organization, and they stumbled over it. What might be some other ways to find and connect to groups that already exist? Collaborating with other agency resources, Google and social media, absolutely. Bringing up conversations in all your social circles, Facebook groups of people in similar fields, attending community events, conferences, local resource councils. The church and synagogues and mosques are excellent ways. Town hall meetings. Who else is going to a town hall meeting? And are they talking about things that you care about? Local planning committees. Libraries and community centers are another place. Absolutely. City council, Facebook pages. The legal community, in the case of the court fees, would be another one. Maybe immigrants' rights groups, professional organizations like the Bar Association, the Chamber of Commerce, using media, absolutely. You know, regardless of what issue you are working on, there are ways to find and connect to people who are working on that other issue. Media, coffee shops, I love it. How many people have posted messages on the bulletin board? It's an old school approach, but it's actually one that still works. And actually talking to people is a really important way to tackle this. So regardless of the particular issue that you are working on in your community, there is one really important systemic issue that affects all of us and all of the issues that we care about, whether you know it or not. So going back to our opening slide and people's feelings about elected officials, many of us feel very discouraged about Congress and its ability to get jobs done for the American people. This survey, which was done in 2017 to 2018, asked, what do you have a higher opinion of, Congress or lice? And lice had a much better favorability rating than Congress did. What do you have a higher opinion of, Congress or cockroaches? And people had a higher opinion of cockroaches than Congress. So, okay, this is a little bit of a joke, but there is absolutely a perception that, especially at the federal level, but other levels of government as well, the parties are so busy fighting, they cannot address our issues. And frankly, since 2018, when this survey was done, I suspect that people's opinions of Congress have actually gotten worse, not better. People feel that our country is more divided than ever before. And, to some extent, that is true. However, our federal legislature is actually even more divided than the voters are. What has happened to the middle? Well, the political middle is disappearing. So if you look at this slide, it shows in 1982, there was actually quite a lot of overlap in the votes between moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. And there were a lot of issues where you could get people from both parties to agree. In 1994, you'll see that things got a little more polarized and there's less overlap in the way that Republicans are voting and Democrats are voting. And if you go all the way down to 2012, you will see that there's actually very little overlap. There's almost no issue that could gain the support of both Republicans and Democrats. And if we showed you the votes since 2012, it has actually gotten even more polarized still. The reason, by the way, that we're using older slides is to try to avoid some of the very heated feelings about current politics and to show that this is a trend that has been happening over time. So, working with elected officials to have them respond to our concerns is a way to try to help drive us back to the middle because this middle is disappearing. And the reality is that actual issues that affect real people are almost never black and white. And when we have polls that get input, public opinion, it almost always shows that there is more agreement among voters than there is among the people that they're voting for. People are divided right now in our country, but they're not as divided as our legislatures are. So why is this happening? Well, part of the problem is the way that congressional and other elected officials' districts are drawn. And you know what? This is not a new phenomenon. It's not a new problem. This is a political cartoon that was published in a Massachusetts newspaper in 1812. Governor Gerry of Massachusetts wanted to control the Massachusetts state legislature and make sure that his party had a majority and would pass his legislation. And so he drew districts for state legislators in a way that would concentrate voters who were going to vote for his party. And he drew this very strange district that wraps around from Salisbury in the northeast to Chelsea in the southwest. The political cartoonist looked at this strangely drawn district and thought that it looked like a salamander. And so the political cartoonist drew this congressional district as a reptile. And it came to be called not a salamander district, but a gerrymandered district after Governor Gerry. Well, that was in 1812. And we are still seeing gerrymandered districts today. So what happened to the missing middle? Part of the problem is that congressional districts are being drawn to give people safe seats. Now, a number of the districts in this slide, again, have been redrawn, but look at the contortions that political parties are going through to make sure that they draw safe districts with a majority of Republicans or a majority of Democrats. And I want to be really clear, both parties participate in drawing these districts in a way that protects their incumbents and gives them safe seats. And these pictures happen to be federal districts, but this happens at all levels, federal, state, and local. And the problem with these gerrymandered districts is that they reward grandstanding instead of results. If you have a safe district, then you have no need to respond to your voters. And this is actually a problem regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. I happen to live in a district where for our county board of supervisors, we're very monolithic. About 85% of people in the district that I live in vote Democratic. And we have a very long time county supervisor who feels no need to respond to the concerns of the voters in her district, even the voters who are from her political party, because she's got a safe seat. And as long as she wants it, she will be there, because in an election, 85% of people are going to vote for her, whether she has responded to their needs or not. So gerrymandering is a problem for all of us and for all of the issues that we care about, because it insulates our elected officials from responding to us. If an elected official, and again, federal, state, local, it doesn't matter, if our elected officials are not concerned about their seats, if they don't think that they're likely to be removed from office, they are less responsive. The most responsive members are the members who are in close districts where the election could go either way with a point or two, and they have to be the most responsive to their voters, because if they're not, they will lose office. So this is a serious concern, and it affects all of us. If you care about early childhood education and funding for early childhood education in the United States Congress, even if your congressional district is not gerrymandered, gerrymandering in other congressional districts will make it harder for you to get your issue through Congress. So there are a lot of people out there who are trying to work on gerrymandering. Since the 2020 census, in preparation for the 2024 election, gerrymandering is starting to be worked on in a number of states. So in New York, where the legislature drew state legislative districts and drew them in a way that tipped the balance, had a lot of gerrymandered districts, a state judge sent that map back to an independent commission, not a Republican-controlled legislature, not a Democratic-controlled legislature, but an independent commission to draw districts that would be more fair and more competitive. In North Carolina, the state legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, drew a map of state legislative districts to send members to the United States House of Representatives that would have had 11 Republican districts and 3 Democratic districts. Now, that is in a state that fairly regularly elects a Democratic governor and a Democratic majority in the state house. while currently in North Carolina, Republicans are in control, if you look at the population of the state, it is not, 80% Republican and 20% Democratic. So the Supreme Court threw out that state's, the legislature's map, and has now offered a new plan that was drawn by the court. And it definitely switches up the districts, but it will eliminate this extreme imbalance. California has also gone to an independent redistricting commission, and it has approved a map that will also remove protections for incumbent members of Congress who are already there, and create districts that are going to be more competitive. Now, there are folks who are concerned about this because the two parties both worry. Nobody really thinks that gerrymandering is a good thing, but everybody worries about unilateral disarmament. Democrats don't want to lose their safe seats unless Republicans are also going to lose their safe seats, and vice versa. So this is a big systemic problem, and it is one that is very hard to tackle. But there are some places that are doing it. So I wonder, do you know if you are in a gerrymandered district? Do you know if you are in a state with a lot of gerrymandered districts? If you would be interested in figuring out how your state scores on the gerrymander report card, you can go to this website, which is maintained by Princeton University, and just check it out and see where your state falls and where the district that you live in falls on the gerrymander score. And maybe in addition to the issue that you are passionate about that brought you to this webinar in the first part, you will start to think about gerrymandering and whether it might stand in the way of progress on the other issues that you care a lot about. So that is a sort of sobering and concerning conversation about gerrymandering. And I don't want to leave you with the idea that gerrymandering stands in the way of anything getting done, because that's not the case. It is still possible to make progress. Gerrymandering makes it a lot more difficult. Gerrymandering makes our legislatures, whether it's the United States Congress or state legislatures, more polarized than the voters are and less responsive to the concerns of voters. But there are still ways to move forward. So, for example, in Colorado in 2020, Proposition 118 was a statewide ballot initiative in support of paid family and medical leave. And it passed with an overwhelming vote by the voters and started offering paid family and medical leave in January 2024. Proposition R in St. Louis created the first public source of funding for services to kids birth to 5. It increased property taxes to be able to make an investment in early childhood education. In Oregon, Multnomah County approved a surtax on high incomes to create universal preschool. In New Mexico, Constitutional Amendment 1 allows for the distribution of funds from the state's land grant fund, which previously funded K-12 and will now fund early childhood education. And we've got a couple of other examples that are in the chat. Even at those are all state level examples, but even at the federal level, it is still possible to make progress. And I have to say, there's a lot of concern, a lot of disillusionment with our elected system. And I am not going to suggest that that disillusionment is incorrect. But working in Washington and working on Capitol Hill, I've seen the worst of the worst. I've also seen the best of the best, and I know that they are there. So this year, the Women, Infant, and Children Nutrition Program, which provides food resources for pregnant women and children under the age of 5, ended up having a shortfall. Food prices are high, and post-pandemic, more people are eligible to participate in WIC than had been previously. Now, for the last 30 years, there has been a bipartisan agreement on Capitol Hill that pregnant women and young children should be able to have access to healthy food. And Congress has always provided enough money so that everyone who is eligible for WIC can participate. There have been no waiting lists. There has been nobody turned away at the door. If they are eligible for WIC, they have been able to get those healthy food benefits. But as food prices have gone up and as the number of people eligible for WIC have gone up, this year, there was going to be a shortfall in WIC. And this year, conservatives in the House of Representatives did not want to provide the added money that would be necessary to allow everyone to participate. There was going to be $1 billion shortfall in WIC. $1 billion of additional funding was needed. And without that money, towards the end of the year, WIC would have to turn people away. Budget hawks, conservatives in Congress, did not want to provide the $1 billion that was needed. And groups, people like you around the country organized. They sent emails, they called, they did op-eds, they posted messages on the Facebook pages and the Twitter accounts of elected officials. They demonstrated on the lawn in front of the Capitol building. They reached out in every way that they knew how. And last week, when the Department of Agriculture appropriations bill was finalized, was passed by Congress and signed into law by the president, it had the full additional $1 billion that was needed to make sure that all eligible pregnant women and young children will have access to healthy food through WIC. It was not a foregone conclusion that that was going to be the outcome. It very nearly did not happen. But advocacy by people like you secured that $1 billion for families that don't have enough to eat without that program. So I am guessing that there may be people on this webinar who helped with that, who sent emails. If you did, thank you. And if you are someone who doubts that voters contacting members of Congress, voters speaking out with their elected officials, voters organizing with other people who care about the same things that they do, if you are someone who believes that that doesn't make a difference, take heart. I'm not suggesting it's easy. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort by a lot of people, but it absolutely is possible to change the course of legislation and of budgets and of people's lives. So I'm really glad that you are here on this webinar to learn how we can all do that with other people as often as possible. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. If there are folks who would like to put questions in the chat, It's a large group and it's hard to do this coming off of, coming on camera and sharing your questions live. But if you have questions, we would be happy to answer them in the couple of minutes that are remaining. So we'll give it a moment. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. And if you need to go on to other things in your day, thank you very much for joining us. We are really glad that you care about advocacy and are willing to work on behalf of issues and people in your community. If you would like to learn more, episode 3 in this series will go into more detail on social media and other tools that you can use to help inform and organize people in your community. That webinar will be held on Tuesday, March 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for spending some time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.